All right, hey people, Russ Jensen. So it's 3:20 on the 8th of January 2017. You know, um, I know that a lot of people aren't watching these things right now. That's okay. Going to be uh, once I get this book published and we start actually using this information, showing people, getting real world results, getting people out of jail. Going to be working on getting some people out of prison. Getting people save their houses out of foreclosure, which we've already done a couple of times. So, and I made a lot of videos over the last month. There's a lot of information, but we're kind of trying to condense everything down because it's not really that complicated. So, what it comes down to is understanding the true nature of the reality that we find ourselves living in, primarily the nature of our governance, how they operate, what they've done. Um, and understanding of who and what we are and our relationship to government, our relationship to one another, our relationship to ourselves, and begin to understand the disconnect between what we believe is reality, what we've been told, that we continue to be told by our elected officials is the truth, what's happening, versus the actuality of the truth. So it becomes very important to understand a few of these simple concepts. So, uh, one of the things we can start doing is start talking about challenging jurisdiction, how we do that. And one of those ways we do that is we prepare some paperwork to file into your county recorder's office. And what that does for us is two primary things. Number one, it challenges the jurisdictional authority that they have tried to drag us into, and then it reestablishes our true jurisdictional authority. So we have to take theirs out, we have to replace it with ours. Now, I've done this in the past and I have mine, but it's like 42 pages of things, and I've realized it doesn't need to be that complicated. I've got it narrowed down to about 3 pages now. It's very simplified. But basically what we're doing is we're taking the same thing that they use. Now, the way they operate is they create some evidence, prima facie evidence, which is evidence that can be challenged, can be rebutted. It's evidence of a fact, but it's not the actual fact itself. And they use that. They use then they make a presumption or assume, because based on that evidence that they've produced, they presume that you are a certain type of a person. And it's that evidence that creates the nexus or the connection between you and your activities and what their activities and what authority they have to act upon you or against you or even for you. Right? So if we talk about the prima facie evidence that they use to, and what is, they're making the presumption that you are a U.S. citizen or a national citizen, when in fact what you are is a de jure citizen of your state, your independent nation state, the republic of whatever your state happens to be, which is what it was, what it should be under the Constitution of the United States of America, that they claim that they get their authority from, but they claim that they can operate outside of that and put you into a jurisdiction that's just outside of the protections of that Constitution. That's what they're doing. So they make that presumption that you're a U.S. citizen. They do that primarily through the Social Security number, through your use of Federal Reserve notes, your use of the FDIC insured banks. There's a number of other documents too, voter registration, driver's licenses, even cell phones now. Fact that you give your Social Security number to your physician, to all kinds of places for credit, loans, car loans, home loans, financing at Best Buy, all those things. Okay. establishes that you are a so-called U.S. citizen. You know, the other big one that they use is your acquiescence by silence, your acceptance of that fact, those facts that they've applied towards you by you're not saying anything. Now, the problem we have in today's modern society, today here, the 8th day of January in 2017, is that it's virtually impossible to function in modern society without the use of a social security number, without the use of Federal Reserve notes, without the use of a FDIC insured bank. Now, in years past, a lot of these patriot groups and liberty movements and whatnot tried to teach people how to operate without use of a social security number, how to put in certain things, how to even actually bring lawsuits under Title 42 for violations of that against these private businesses that were accessing and denying services for your failure to provide a social security number. But realize that we don't need to do that. We need to rely upon our right of necessity, our fundamental, unalienable right of necessity, a indispensable obligation, one that's put upon us by nature that we can't get out of. We have to fulfill it, of self-preservation. And the fact that your government now has created a situation where there is no viable option. So that helps us considerably when we start talking about acquiescence or silence, the fact that even if we speak out, it doesn't give us a remedy. They have not allowed for a remedy. Therefore, our acceptance and our silence is not voluntary. That's what they claim. You voluntarily took the benefit of the Social Security number. Therefore, you must also take along the any limitations, liabilities, detriments that might come along with that so-called benefit. And in my book, I've got a couple of cases that the courts talk about that very thing. You took the benefit, so we're not going to. You must be attendant to the pain and the disability that goes along with that. But the fact of the matter is, your government is formed for the purpose of benefits and protection. That's the other thing too. A lot of these patriot groups talk about, well, the taxes for it's a protection racket. That's what you pay. They can force you to pay that because you're under the protection of that local sovereign. No, the local sovereign has a duty to me and to you for their very existence. Now, maybe way back in the day when it was kings and monarchs, but here in the United States of America, it's a constitutional republic. There's a Senate, there's a Constitution, written fundamental law that they have to operate by. They get their authority from that. And that's just the other thing, too, that we challenge that. It's also, we go to our book, Law of Nations, which is our jurisdictional authority. And we start to attack their position. So it's more than just challenging their position. We challenge the fact that the evidence that they're making their presumptions on Social Security, the Federal Reserve notes, the banking, all those different things, those can be challenged, those can be rebutted. We put better information in that says, hey, we never voluntarily gave up our de jure state citizenship. And even though it appears that our state government did that for us, they didn't have permission or authority to do that either. And if we look in Book 1, Section 30, and 52, and a whole bunch of different sections, talks about what happens when the sovereigns attack the constitution of the state, which is what they've done. Creating these non-constitutional jurisdictions. No, they rule without authority. They have no lawful authority. So it doesn't really matter what they say that we did or did not do. Doesn't matter what they say we are supposed to be obligated to as far as their legal statutes, because those legal statutes are without authority, without proper constitutional authority. Doesn't matter if they claim to have done it under Article 4, territorial powers of the Congress. Didn't have permission to remove the de jure state governments. And the de jure state governments didn't have permission to engage into contracts and agreements with the federal government under territorial powers or under instrumentalities, or under the guise of welfare, especially considering the fact that the very purposes of those programs was to do the very thing that they're doing, expansion of federal authority, expansion of federal reach. So that's what we start to do. We start to attack their presumptions. We start to attack the evidence that they claim brings us into their jurisdiction. And then we begin to turn the tables upon them and force them to begin to answer these simple questions about where is the authority coming from that you believe that you can have done those things, that you can create a non-constitutional legislative administrative jurisdiction that you can attach to me as a real person, a member of society that hasn't voluntarily consented to be into your jurisdiction. I didn't consent to not being able to access common law, not being able to access my Constitution without the permission of a judge who decides if I can or cannot. So it becomes very simple. Paperwork that we put in, we file to our county recorders, about 3 pages long, not filled with 10,000 pages of citations and statutes and laws and all that stuff, which I've done in the past. It worked great. I really did. The tax situation. But we challenge their authority. We establish our true lawful authority, the true lawful constitutional jurisdictional authority that we consent to be governed by. Now, there's a number of court rulings talking about the fact of compacts, agreements in societies that if you choose not to consent to that, that agreement, that compact's still viable for those individuals that want to operate under it. All that means is that you are not, it doesn't apply to you. Now, we live by the rule of law. That's what we're trying to reestablish here under an understanding of the law of nations, our Constitution, how our governance is supposed to be happening. We also have to understand that men and women, humanity, swings from good behavior to bad behavior at all points in between. And perhaps some of these jurisdictions that they have created are beneficial for some individuals that need to have a very structured, they need to be told exactly what they can and cannot do. They don't have personal responsibility, take care of themselves financially, take care of themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, be able to protect themselves, do all the things that you're supposed to be able to do as a sovereign individual. But the fact that there might be individuals that aren't capable of doing those things doesn't mean that those of us that are capable of doing those things must be subjected to the unlawful, non-constitutional, legislative, and administrative jurisdiction by presumption. Being forced to be into that because you in government have taken away all other possibilities, all other options. my use of a Social Security number because of my right of necessity that they forced me into, uh, I'm not being unlawful. Because if we look in Book 2, Section 119, talks about what the right of necessity, what that is. What that means is that something, an act that would otherwise be unlawful because of the right of necessity, a right which we cannot be denied, a right remaining from the state of primitive communion. And the state of primitive communion is explained specifically in Book 2, Section 116, rights which we cannot be denied, or Book 2, Section 117. So that right of necessity makes something that otherwise would be unlawful to be lawful for me to do in order to meet my indispensable obligation. And one of those happens to be self-preservation. I have to be able to survive. And if in the government has decided that everybody must utilize this number, it's not voluntary at all. Right? My state sovereigns have abandoned me. You start looking at Book 2, Section 202, also in Book 1, talks about what happens when the sovereignty abandons the people. When they attack the Constitution, what happens? By the very act of the sovereigns themselves, the government themselves, the bounds, the things that bound the people to the sovereigns are broken by the act of the sovereign themselves. The sovereigns rule with no authority. And if I've been abandoned by the sovereign, my state government, my de jure state government, and all de jure means is with authority, and de facto means without, I'm left to defend myself, to deal as I must in order to meet my indispensable obligations. Number one, self-preservation. Must be of assistance to my fellow men also. Another indispensable obligation I have that I can't get out of is to convert energy into value, into my society. Part of that process involves engaging in commerce. They act as if engaging in commerce is something that you have a voluntary choice in, and therefore they can tax it. Therefore they can legislate it, regulate it. And they can within certain limitations that were placed upon them in that document known as the Constitution of the United States of America, which they claim they get their authority from, but they don't abide by it. So it's an impossibility. You don't abide by the very document that you claim your authority from, you're operating without authority. Now, as far as cannabis use goes, my rights of individuals, my indispensable obligation of endeavoring to know my Creator through actions, through the use of substances, which I had access to in my state of primitive communion. You don't have permission, Mr. Government Man, to make that criminal. You cannot deny me the use of anything on this planet in order to meet my indispensable obligations, as long as I'm doing it in a manner that is not damaging to a real person, and also something that I'm doing in my private space. So that's pretty much the argument. Now, we're working through all the a little bit more of the details on the specifics of what we're stating, what we're using to rebut or challenge their prima facie evidence of being a U.S. citizen, which in fact I'm not, certainly. Okay? The Social Security number, the Federal Reserve notes, the FDIC, the voter registration, the driver's license, all those things. By doing that, then we remove the presumption that we are that type of a person. And by doing that, then it breaks the nexus, which is the connecting point between us and their jurisdiction. In their jurisdiction, they don't have authority to act. They don't have a law spoken that they can bring against us. And then we establish our jurisdiction, our superior jurisdiction, based on the laws of nature. and which is always superior to the law of man, and the law of nations, which has codified the laws of nature, as applied to sovereigns and sovereignty, which then becomes constitutional law by its inclusion in your Constitution of the United States of America, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10. Uh, so we then create a superior jurisdiction, and from that point then, we start making presumptions. We start providing prima facie evidence of the fact that they have attacked that very Constitution, that they're operating without proper constitutional authority, that they have engaged in treasonous acts, and they need to be put on trial. They need to have their day in court like they have done for many of us. But we're doing it with proper authority. So that's kind of an overview in a nutshell. You know, let me showing people what we're going to be writing, what you need to write, paperwork you can put in, you file at your county recorder's office, you keep it with you, you file down at your local courthouse, you file it into your record, and we also start sending these informations into at the Supreme Court level, and we're going to start bringing some actions. And one of the places too that we're going to start talking to people about is the Court of Claims, the United States Court of Claims. Start getting redress against these pirates that have hijacked our governance, have hijacked our society, have taken upon themselves to put you and your family into slavery. Now everybody says, oh, but the system's so great, I have all these great things. I'm pretty sure that the amount of money that they extort, that they have unlawfully done through wealth transfer mechanisms in your society, no, your society would be so much greater, so much better off. Your lives would be so much richer if this small group of criminals hadn't come along and hijacked things, done irreparable damage to the planet, your home place, the only place that we know that life exists. So, till next time, I love everybody, and well, talk to you then.